Okay, welcome back. Whoops, I want to go there. This is the fourth lecture of Unit 4. So this is the Art Impulse lecture for Unit 4, which is basically the theme lecture. I'll just go over this one more time so we're all kind of clear. Every unit has an art historical topic that we start with, and then that leads us into talking about an art medium. This particular unit for Unit 4, the art medium was architecture. And then that usually leads to us talking about um, some uh, some design issues. So in this case, we talked about space and we talked about scale, and that also led to talking about hierarchy and proportion. So those are the design issues that we discussed for this unit. And then lastly, every unit has an an impulse or a theme that we kind of cover related to the reasons people make art and what do people want to say with art. Okay, so the topic for today is the memorial impulse. And I can't get my bar to disappear here. Will it eventually? There we go. Um, the memorial impulse. And to a degree, the memorial impulse is somewhat similar to the very first theme that we talked about, the existential impulse. They overlap a little bit, which is that the same, in a way, it's almost like the memorial impulse is the state version of the existential impulse, right? The existential impulse is the impulse that every human being, no matter how isolated, kind of wants to be able to say, I was here. In fact, to a degree, even more so when they are isolated. Whereas the memorial impulse is what the same kind of desire, but collectively, where a group of society, especially led by, a state, a leader, they want to be able to say, we were here and we want to make sure that people know we did this, including into the future. So some of the things that makes the memorial impulse slightly different from that first is that desire for this statement to kind of be specific and to be to the future, not just for now, not just stating I am here, but stating we were here, and that even when we are long dead and gone, that this monument, this thing will still be here to say we were here. And and then the other major difference is that it's more about the collective, right? Um, and for most of history, the collective is really the um, the distilled power of the collective into, one person or a small family, the ruling elite. And so, because even in like fourth century BCE Athens, the ideal of democracy was far less democratic than what we would think of when we think of the idea of democracy. Okay, so there we go. That's what we're going to start with. And like always, and I'm just kind of reiterating this because it makes it easier for people to understand the purpose of all these lectures. Every lecture has kind of like a little bit of a statement explaining the whole point of the lecture, and then has kind of like a little bit of an outline that just shows you the rough structure that we're going to be following. And then it also has kind of a grid of images. Now, for those of you in the class, you will notice that the outline structure here is way more pared down and also oftentimes slightly different than the outline structure in the notes. That's because I wrote the notes to be about the specifics, about the little tiny details, including the ones that I don't even get to, right? Like that I wrote the notes specifically to cover things like, and this was this date, or this was this exact location so that when I'm lecturing, I can more focus on the big principles. Okay. So memorials, monumental, right? So I think the pyramids of Giza are a great example. Now, let me say this. I don't think that the pyramids of Giza were entirely made for the purposes of memorial, right? They were primarily made for funerary purposes to be a tomb. But there certainly was a decision made by this period of the Old Kingdom, which, by the way, was not made for most of the Old Kingdom and not made in later kingdoms, right? Like before the end of the Old Kingdom, we'd already switched away from the plan of these really large and very visible pyramids to other plans, moving towards the what we would eventually see in the New Kingdom, where these tombs were cut into cliff walls and um, were were very elaborate and impressive on the inside, but relatively hidden on the outside. But at this point, these are these are spectacles, right? So for whatever reason, at this point, perhaps because the pharaohs were so powerful at this time that it never even occurred to them that their tombs would be robbed. Uh, they they built these to be kind of like public statements, and definitely something like the Great Sphinx is also a public statement. And so you make something really enormous, really monumental, because you want to make something that says to everyone, we were here, we were powerful. Uh, Kara Walker is doing something, not so much making the same statement as making a little bit of maybe a critique, a commentary on that kind of statement here with her piece, A Subtlety. So one of the things that I note here in this lecture, and I've noted many times before, and I will note again, is that unfortunately, for most of history, most of these kind of monuments that that reflect this memorial impulse, most of them are about military triumphs. That for whatever reason, for human beings, that's the thing we want to emphasize more than anything else. So whether it's the Victory Stele of Naram Sin, which is about a particular winning of a battle, or Trajan's column, and here we have a detail of it, right? Or the Verrocchio equestrian statue. These are all, celebrations of military might and military victory. And I wish that bar would disappear more quickly. And so And we see this in the US, right? And specifically in the South, we have a lot of equestrian monuments and other kinds of military monuments. Many of them are, in fact, monuments made for particular people, particular generals of the Confederate South to memorialize the Confederacy. And a good example is this one um, in Memphis, in Forest Park, named after Nathan Bedford Forrest, not because the park is like a forest. And here is a group of art students from the Memphis College of Art, as well as an art professor, who are doing an art performance where they are, as part of their performance, they're purposely blocking out the statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest. If you don't know, General Forrest was not only a Confederate general, but he was also one of the early founders of the Ku Klux Klan. So the fact that there is a public and publicly supported statue of him in a public park is very upsetting to some people. Well, there is no longer the Bedford Forest statue has been taken down since this point. So gates and archways are one of the ways that people will make these kind of big triumphal and militaristic statements. So the Romans were especially interested in this. Instead of doing stelae, they loved making what they called these triumphal arches. And the reasoning is because it goes, one, generally cities at this time in the world all had walls, and all the walls also had gates and arches and gateways to get in and out of cities. So just by being the power of that being the people who are running things, it was part of Rome's job to maintain and to run these sort of large gate structures going in and out of cities. And two, the Romans had a tradition in Rome itself that then got exported out, which was that when some general would do something really, exciting and amazing, they would write letters back to the city and then they say, we're coming in, and they would have a triumphal march as the army would return to Rome, and it would generally be planned around which gate they would be coming into. And so many an emperor would specifically make triumphal archway gates for the purposes of having a triumphal parade, um, like the Arch of Constantine. And then the Arc de Triomphe in Paris is kind of an elaboration and a play on that idea, where instead of it being a marking of a particular person, a particular leader, a particular set of battles, a particular set of victories, it is more about victoriousness and triumph in the abstract sense. It is the triumph of French culture and the French spirit of freedom kind of contained in it, but it's still basically a triumphal arch. It's still the same kind of structure as what we have here from the Romans. And then here's a very more modern, more almost contemporary kind of version of this, which is the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, which is a different kind of arch, but it's still kind of related to this idea of triumph, right? Because the Gateway Arch is the idea is that this was the St. Louis was the gateway to the West. And so by going through this gateway, that's part of how the country of the US conquered the Western frontier and turned what was, Native American land into United States. Of course, probably the most obvious kind, and you're probably wondering why I skipped this at the beginning, most obvious kind of memorials are the memorials for the dead. And every culture for, or almost every culture for so much of human history have made markers and things to mark the dead, whether it's small cairns, which are like piles of stones, or stone markers with like this Luwian stone marker, which is really beautiful, or giant complexes like the Mausoleum of Halicarnassus, right? Or grave stelae, right? So this is another kind of stele instead of um, a victory stele or a triumphal stele. This is a funerary stele, and the Greeks love to make these kind of steles for to mark graves, and that's probably where we have our tradition of gravestones comes more mostly out of the Greek tradition, but also the tombs of the pyramids of Giza. These are all various ways of saying someone great has died and they are buried here. Another way is something more subtle and probably more public, but also more mysterious because we don't know exactly what they mean or what was said. But in the Mississippi and Ohio Valley basins, there were for a certain time of people, certain time period, there were these people or various groups of people who we now call the mound builders. And so there's a mound up in let's see. Well, there's a set up in Cahokia, which is near St. Louis. There's one near us just outside of Tuscaloosa. There's one also if you drive north to Corinth and then continue going north like you're heading towards Jackson, Tennessee. Can't remember the name of the town, but just a little bit south of Jackson, Tennessee, there's another site where there are these mound builder mounds. And many times mounds are purely just circular, but sometimes they're much more complex. They're kind of like complex earthworks. And there's a whole, I can't remember the name of the site in Ohio, where they have like the whole town is just littered with all these different mound structures. And but probably one of the most famous ones in Ohio and all of the US is the Great Serpent Mound, where they made this giant kind of serpent structure. And I find it interesting that how similar this is to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in the way that it's using and manipulating the earth as a way of kind of like saying, hey, we were here. And that leads to talking about so the Vietnam Veteran Memorial is one of my favorite works of art. And one of the reasons that I really admire it is that it was given the task of doing something very, very basic, very expected, which was to make a memorial about a war. And instead of making it a triumphal, militaristic memorial, it is a memorial about the war dead, and and it's a memorial that is about the cost of a war. So it is not titled the Vietnam War Memorial. It's titled the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. So it is a memorial to the veterans who have served, who survived, but also especially those who passed away in the war. And as I mentioned in a previous lecture, the structure of it, the way it's kind of like this giant wound in the earth, the way it functions in this kind of V shape that you start from one end, and as you walk down, you're basically walking the timeline of the war. And as you further follow along the timeline of the war, you get deeper and deeper into it, right? The death toll rises. At first, the death toll is below your knee, right? It's just a few people, a year dying. But by the time you get down to here, the death toll is towering over you. It's this incredibly large amount of names rising above you because so many people were dying every day in Vietnam at the height of the war. And then it captures also that sense that our leaving of Vietnam was kind of a petering out as well, so that the death toll decreases in a similar kind of way on the as you walk outward and going back up the incline. Okay, so instead of monuments that are about the power of the state and monuments that are about the military might of great leaders and about the military might of great armies, what if we made um, what if we made memorials that were about the people, about us? I think it's been tried, right? Like the Monument to the Third International by Tatlin was definitely an attempt at this, and it is a pretty amazing and weird and interesting piece of sculpture as a monument. It had, so, but it is kind of a yeah, I think it's an ideal that is yet unrealized, is how I would say it. Or perhaps um, maybe instead of monuments to the big giant power of the state, of the collective, it should be monuments to the personal, to the self, right? Um, or to our better selves. And I think like Jenny Holzer's um, work in general, but especially the ones that she makes where she uses um, like actual stonework, where it's something that's really going to last. uh like this bench series where in a park they're just these series of these different benches, and every single bench has a phrase, a little kind of statement like this that just will make you think, make you wonder for a long time. And I think that that's a pretty amazing type of memorial. Or also Cloud Gate. My middle son is right now in Chicago, just went to see the Bean. And I had to remind him that the official name is The Cloud Gate by Anish Kapoor. And it is a beautiful piece. And we have come pretty much to the end of the lecture. So probably my favorite example of a memorial is this piece right here, which is a completely impermanent memorial. It's Portrait of Ross by Felix Gonzalez Torres. And I think really gets at this idea of what all of those bombastic state-based, power-based, military might-based memorials don't get, which is, that we are human beings, that we are fragile. Anyway, this piece, the way it works is um, when he originally set it up, it's a pile of candy. It was actually in the center of a room and had a sign that went with it, right? And the sign basically said, one sign just says, please take a piece of candy, right? And so you take the piece of candy, and then as you walk out, there's another sign that you stop and read. And the sign says that the way the piece is designed, it is estimated based off of the number of people who are going to be coming and visiting the gallery space, and the number of people who will be expected to take a piece of candy, that this piece will function like a clock and counting down time, and that by the time the pile of candy is completely down to nothing, that then Ross will be dead. And so it's like uh, Ross was Felix Gonzalez Torres's partner, and Ross had AIDS, and he was dying. And so Torres made this piece to function like a clock to count down the days to his death, and to also kind of like um, make us all involved and implicated in that like as you take that piece of candy, you have become part of this process of watching Ross die, right? And so it's a great piece. It's a smart piece, but it's an incredibly moving and powerful piece. And it's really simple, but I'm glad I like to end this lecture with this piece because for me, of all the works that kind of get at that idea, the memorial impulse, this is still my favorite. Okay, I think that's it. That's the end. I don't think I had anyone. Um, so stop share. Don't think there was anyone with me on this, so that's okay. No questions to answer. For those of you watching this as a video, well, you have a great rest of your day. And for those of you in my class, make sure to get your work done. Okay, thanks. Bye.